2022 was a bumper year of Test cricket. It started with Australia's demolition job of England in the Ashes down under, South Africa's home win over India, Bangladesh pulling off one of the great overseas wins in New Zealand, and it ended with England bazballing their way to a 3-0 win over Pakistan in Pakistan. There's loads in between. England won 6 of their 7 home tests. Australia won in Pakistan. Sri Lanka had 2 gripping home series against Australia and Pakistan. West Indies beat England at home, and much more. As part of our year in review, the Wisden.com team have compiled a list of the top 5 innings and top 5 spells in Test cricket from 2022. I'm with the managing editor of Wisden.com, Ben Gardner. Ben, we're going to do the innings today. This has been democratically picked from across teams, not just in the UK, but in India as well, to swat away accusations of bias.
Yeah, and Cam voted, and he's in Australia, so he's an honorary Aussie now, I think. Yeah, so we basically had everyone put down their top 5 innings from 5 to 1 and sort of reverse rank them in terms of points, if that makes sense. So if you put something number 1, it got 5 points. If you put it number 2, it got 4 points, etc. And then added all those up and then came to ranking that way. And we did make sure to, just to make sure everyone was abreast of everything that had happened that year, to go and research rather than just going off the top of your head. While also, obviously, some innings that you might have seen live or at the time or have some special link to might get a bit more favour. But I think if you look at the spells we picked in particular, there's no hint there of bias or anything implicit. I think it's just the ones that have came out in the testings. I think it's just happened. That's how Test cricket happened this year.
Well, we'll start with the innings in 5th place. It's the first of 3 Johnny Bairstow innings in our top 5. Ben, when we were putting the list together, you had the realisation that Bairstow run of form in the summer was one of the most ridiculous streaks that anyone has ever been on in cricket.
Yeah, and I was a bit worried when we set about doing this that he was actually going to end up splitting the votes between his best innings. So you might end up with him down in 5th and nowhere else or something. And actually, he was good enough that he ended up all over the list. And this innings, I think this is probably the one in a way that almost, not that suffers most, but if he hadn't played the 2 before, I could easily see this innings being actually at number 1 or 2, I think. Like when you think that this India team that England beat is probably the best opposition on paper that England beat the whole year. And drawing that series was a big deal as well. I mean, I know it's obviously loads had changed since that previous summer, but when you thought back to when England were at that point, going into that game, their opens in the previous test had been, Rory Burns and Haseeb Mead, I think, and both teams had new captains. But it still felt like just a sign of how far things had changed that England were able to win the test in that way. And then also...
it was an innings unlike his other innings on this list, in that it kind of demonstrated an entire range that he actually, even though that the highlight reels at the end of the year will show him scoring at more than run a ball quite often, actually in this innings he showed that he can do both.
Yeah, well, so he was 13 off 61 at one point, and England were kind of going nowhere. And then Virat Kohli sort of had a bit of a dig at him, and Bairstow kind of bit back. The next ball, Bairstow plays this kind of massive waft, and Kohli kind of has a laugh, thinking like, this has worked, we'll get him soon. And then Bairstow goes absolutely crazy and brings up his 100 about 70 balls later. So it was typical Bairstow and it wasn't. And actually you saw that at other points this year as well. Obviously that run of form was basically just about him, apart from this one small stretch. He just kind of went crazy the whole time. But saying that that West Indies series, the 100 at the first in the first game of that was a real kind of technical knock on quite a tough pitch when England really needed someone to dig in, and he did that. I think that might have been his slowest Test 100. And even with like the Sydney innings, there was sort of levels to it, and he showed his range. And all throughout, I think he's shown kind of like, this isn't really Bairstow just going into one day mode and that coming off. It does seem like it was all based on a more secure technical foundation than he'd shown in that kind of 3-year stretch, I think. And I guess what's amazing about this is that the innings in the second innings also didn't get in, because that was a rapid 100 securing England's highest ever chase. So I think you would put that one above this one, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I did, just because I remember being at the ground when England lost a few wickets in quick succession, and Bumrah was bowling really well, and just felt that the momentum was back with India. Bumrah is one of the best bowlers in the world in those conditions. It was a bit overcast. You could see India running through England. I mean, we'll get to a couple more Bairstow innings later on, But another theme is that like, England had a really long tail for the home summit, unusually long. England had normally had a very competent number 8 or 9 in the past, but this year they didn't have that. So with that context as well, I thought the second innings knock was incredible. But obviously England were 83 for 5 in the first innings. India had 416. So again, the context there was huge. Moving on to fourth place. Test cricket probably won't see Rishabh Pant in 2023 after his horrific car crash the other week. And 2022 was actually a quiet year for India in Test cricket, but Pant still had a few crazy innings. And like Bairstow, he could have been on this list for more than one knock. But he gets onto it with his ridiculous 100 came down that came in defeat. It was 100 out of 198 India runs in their second innings. Ben, that was just Pant at his absolute best. When there's some criticism about his method after some Pant-like dismissals earlier in the series.
Yeah, and Pant, he did have a brilliant year. There were the other knock that got a few votes was the one in the first innings of the Test where Bairstow was at number 5, and there were other. He got a couple 90 odds, I think. So for some stats, Bairstow got 43% of the votes was Bairstow innings, which is crazy. And then if you put Bairstow and Pant between them, they got over 60% of all the votes were for innings played by one or the other, which is crazy. This was a brilliant innings, and was the kind of thing that Pant can do where sometimes you're almost not really sure how he's doing it, because it seems like he's not in control of himself sometimes, right? Like he's falling over playing these shots. He's sort of hooking balls above his head and like looks like he's leaning really far over. He's sort of almost like tottering around like a toddler, and yet it's always fine in the middle of the bat. Like this pitch was really, really tough. The totals in the first 2 innings were around 200. Kohli, and I think it was in contrast to Kohli that made it seem so special. Like Kohli actually, I think he did play really, really well to make 29 of 143. And the bowling was just that good, and the pitch was that tough that unless you took what seemed like a lot of risks, you were just you weren't going to get like anything really. And Pant took risks when you look at the shots, but then when you look at the fact that he wasn't really missing the ball, he was scoring quickly, but like it didn't it would be risky for anyone else, but for him it's just what he does. And I guess it was one of those actually where you like at the time when the innings finished, I was like, wow, that's like one of the best innings I can remember actually. And I think what takes the sheen off it slightly, which is why it's in 4th and not pushing 1 or 2. I think he could possibly have marshalled the tail slightly better. So he was 71 of 76 when Kohli got out, and they collapsed from 152 for 4 to 198 all out. And he was
not quite his fault, but he could have managed the situation.
Yeah, I guess. And then South Africa won by 7 wickets, so maybe it wouldn't have mattered if he got another 30, but maybe the extra scoreboard pressure does. And then there is also the fact that India they lost the game. Like if that is the deciding innings in India's first ever series win in South Africa, that kind of confirms them as one of the greatest ever teams. Considering at that point as well, you've got what they would have just won in Australia, 2-1 up in England. If they then go and win in South Africa, you're like, this is a proper dynasty we're seeing here. And then that doesn't happen, and then also you have India's other struggles that year. That is not Pant's fault, but this is how we evaluate innings, isn't it? It's partly about the technique and the conditions and all that sort of thing, but it's also partly about the context. And on the first 2, Pant's it's kind of almost peerless, but on the last it just falls down slightly, I guess.
Yeah, and it's worth saying as well that people will be shouting in the comment section about innings that we haven't included in this list. We've been doing this system for picking innings and spells of the years for 3 or 4 years now. I think this was notably the most competitive for innings. There are some absolutely incredible innings that aren't on this top 5, and I think there are quite a few of this top 5 would have, I think, been number 1 or at least number 2 in previous years.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, but then when you think back to how good some of the other winners have been, I mean, when you think of 2021
was Carl Mayers.
Yeah, and Pant's 89 not out to win that game.
True.
Didn't even get number 1 then. 2020 is sort of a bit of an anomaly. 2019, you had 2 of the greatest innings of all time, people would say. But yeah, some things that didn't get on, which I think do deserve
I think the overall top 5 is probably stronger.
Yes, that's probably the case. But yeah, should we name check some of the ones that didn't get on now? Is that the time to do it?
Yeah, go for it.
So we had Dinesh Chandimal's double 100 to win a test against Australia to draw that series. Babar somehow doesn't get a mention at all. That was at 196 against Australia, but also that I think the century against Sri Lanka might have been even better. I think next high score of 20, above half the runs in the innings. Brathwaite's sort of vigil, which we were at Barbados for, which at the time was quite hard to sit through. But then when you look back a week later, when West Indies have won that series, kind of takes on kind of like a even more importance. Trying to think which other ones we're missing. Yeah, Joe Root doesn't get on.
He scored 600 as well.
Yeah, no, 500 I think.
500, okay.
Yeah, but that one at Lords, I wonder what England's year looks like if that doesn't happen. And at that point as well, it felt different, but it felt the same. England had good seam bowlers, and they had Joe Root, and they didn't have much else in that game. And that was a brilliant innings too. So and I mean Australia have had a decent year as well in Test cricket, obviously winning in Pakistan, drawing in Sri Lanka, absolutely demolishing their home summer, and they can't get a look in either. So.
Now on to the top three. This guy made his debut at the end of 2021, but had a real breakout year in 2022. It was a bad year for Pakistan in Test cricket, but they have potentially found a very special player in young Abdullah Shafiq. Ben, it's probably the least well-known of the innings in the top five. Do you want to talk us through it?
Yeah, so it was a really good game, and a really good stretch of 4 tests in that kind of Sri Lanka summer. And so you had they drew 1-1 with Australia and Pakistan, and both of them are really good adverts for 3 test series, I guess, in that you kind of wanted to decide like they're both perfectly poised, and you didn't get that. Sri Lanka coming back from defeat in the first game both times. This game, it looked like they had it sewn up. First innings totals around 200. Both times. Chandimal made a brilliant 94 in the third innings to take the target to 342. So you think the pitch didn't look like it was getting much harder. It wasn't like it was breaking up and spinning more. But also you kind of think that fourth innings, balls turning, chasing the 350, that just doesn't really happen, basically. That shouldn't be possible. And I guess what was most impressive about Shafiq's innings is that with that kind of pitch, you can sort of think to yourself, I'm going to have to try and do something here, because otherwise it's going to be a ball with my name on it and that'll be the end. And he just absolutely did not do that. Like, he batted over 400 balls, nearly 8.5 hours. And a thrawling battle between him and Prabhat Jayasuriya, who was one of the debutants of the year, I guess you'd say, who took loads of wickets through all those 4 tests to sort of keep Sri Lanka on with honours even in those series. So Prabhat Jayasuriya took 4 wickets but just couldn't get through Shafiq. And when you think that he's 22 years old, made a debut less than a year ago, to show that kind of maturity and grit and concentration and everything else, I think Pakistan have found something really special there.
Yeah, he did have a great end to the year, but we were saying, and this is probably one for another video, that actually despite Pakistan's bad year from a results perspective, through players that they have found, they are potentially not that far from being a really strong side. Obviously, they've discovered Abrar Ahmed, who had a really good end to the year. There's Mohammad Herrera, who's not played yet for Pakistan, but has got this incredible domestic record. And Naseem Shah's come on quite a lot in the last 6 months as well. So there's a real potential there for a team to properly compete with the best sides in the world, home and away. Yeah,
Saul Shakil and Sam Naga as well are the other 2 who they've found recently who have done really good things.
Yeah. On to the top 2. Both of these are by Johnny Bairstow. It was quite hard to split these 2, actually. They're both incredible in quite similar ways, and one was probably in terms of the match situation was more impressive. The other one kind of spoke more of what was to come and kind of represented the year better. Ben, do you want to talk about the knock that came in second place?
Yes, so that was Bairstow's 162 at Headingley. I was lucky enough to be there for this one, and it was quite hard things to write about, actually, because often with these things you're looking for like sort of telling the story of the innings through like how it evolved and how it changed. And there was like a little bit of this in terms of Bairstow had a bit of a counterpunch. I think he hit 4 fours in his first 9 balls, like hit 4 in a row, and then England lost 2 more, and then he kind of shut up shop a little bit until tea. But after that, it was just pure madness, basically. And it was amazing how quickly the tone changed from like, and it almost like it didn't even change. Like it almost never felt like England's position was as bad as it actually was, which I guess showed how quick that kind of...
Well, people forget about what the start of that innings. Trent bowled, I thought, one of the spells of the year. He bowled all 3 of England's top 3.
Yes, and it's the first time an opening bowler has done that in an opening spell since like 1902, I think.
Okay.
So that was amazing. So yeah, the ball was doing loads, and this was also, you've got to remember as well, like now it can kind of feel like everything that's happened under McCullum was kind of like inevitable and always going to happen, and England were always going to be playing this way. But like, and still some people are saying like, wait until Pat Cummins gets a hold of England or whatever it is. At that point, that was very much what people were thinking. They were thinking like, okay, first test was like, okay, Joe Root can do it. Can anyone else do it? Second test was like, okay, flat pitch, well played, but can you do it when the ball's doing a bit? And this felt like the correction. England were 55 for 6. Stokes had hit his second or third ball for 6 and then got out 10 balls later trying to do the same thing again. England Cricket actually tweeted like, our duty is to entertain or something, which is what Stokes had said before the test, and then deleted it as soon as Stokes got out, which was quite fun. So in some ways it felt like everything was going to not come crashing down. That's probably a bit too strong, but this was going to be sort of like the thing to check England's ego. And then Bairstow,
and also England have always been quite good at home, even when they've struggled. So at this point, you're like, okay, it's cool. The Trent Bridge win was amazing. That's not a test match they would have ordinarily won before. But at the end of the day, England do broadly win home series, but I guess to win from this position was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, and also England have won home series, but often not dominated home series as well.
Yeah.
But Bairstow was just kind of having none of it basically, and it was just how quickly the atmosphere in that final session was like it was almost like watching a football team when they're sort of 2 or 3-0 up, and it's like the 85th minute, and they're passing around the back, and the crowd is like saying like "Ole" with everyone. That was kind of the sound that was greeting every 4. It was like, "Hey, another one." But England were actually like still really far behind in the game. And I guess you also saw there as well how much Bairstow was kind of lifting the other members of the England team with how Jamie Overton played. Like he was almost in some ways matching Bairstow, but obviously Bairstow's was by far the better, considering he, how much earlier he came in, and that he did have to see off that spell at the beginning as well.
And Overton's not played a test since. That could be his only ever test innings.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And what was also nice with Bairstow was how a lot of his hundreds are sort of, he doesn't really celebrate them. He sort of like they make him really angry, or he's like, "How could you ever have doubted me?" sort of thing. This obviously came right after that Trent Bridge 100. He was already having a good year. It was in front of his home crowd who were clearly like absolutely adoring him, and he was able to just seem really happy when it happened. Basically, just took off his helmet, was smiling loads. It wasn't like a full sort of red face Bairstow celebration. It was something else, which I think was nice for him as well.
Moving on to number 1, this was the innings at Trent Bridge, 136. He was 2 balls away from breaking the record for the fastest ever English Test 100. I remember talking to someone in the press box at tea, and we were wondering what was going to happen. So England needed 160 to win from the final session. They were already 1-0 up in the series and 2 wickets away from that very long tail. This press box colleague confidently predicted a draw, and I think understandably so. A year ago against New Zealand, England basically opted out of chasing 280 across an entire day. They were up in the series. It's a very flat pitch. They did incredibly well to just be in the game. They started positively, but then they lost their way a little bit. They were actually kind of behind the rate despite being positive, and you're wondering how are England going to play this? And then within basically an hour, the game was done. Stokes famously tells Bairstow to stop hitting the ball on the ground. And I think in terms of match situation, the Headingley knock is more impressive. But we were talking about this on the podcast last week that Ben Duckett says that Stokes and McCullum didn't have to actually tell him anything about how to go about batting in Pakistan. And we thought that this Bairstow innings is probably why that innings did all the talking. Players were given full license to play their natural games, and he pulled it off so spectacularly that that was kind of it for the rest of the year. England players were like, this is how we want to play, and we're going to do it. And I think, however good this England team actually are, and I do get the criticism that who knows what's going to happen against a truly elite bowling attack, but I think people are missing the point because of how bad England were before that. They've come so far in quite a short space of time. And also, even if England are only the 2nd, 3rd or 4th best team in the world right now, they are doing things differently to everyone else. And this was the innings that started it. I mean, Rishabh Pant has played innings like it over the last few years, but for the majority of a top 7 to bat in this way, for them to have the Rawalpindi win on one of the flattest pitches I've ever seen, that's only really possible because I think this innings, like they had the confidence in the bank, and I don't think it's too extreme to say that this is potentially a glimpse of what Test cricket could become. Batters get stick these days for not being as defensively secure as previous generations. The players have so many more shots now than they've ever had before, and this is how more and more players will play. They'll have fewer first-class matches in between Test series. They could be playing franchise cricket, the very, very best players. And if you want the best players to play all formats, they probably won't get that much first-class cricket, and you're probably going to get more and more innings like this. So it might be, if Test cricket is still a thing in 10, 15 years' time, that this innings is looked back on as being extremely significant.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there might be people who will sort of quibble, look at this, think New Zealand were a bowler down, the pitch was really flat, that sort of thing. And so, like, was this really the, when you take, was it the most technically brilliant innings of the year? But this was the defining innings of 2022, really, and may even be even more so in years to come, I guess. And especially maybe by the end of the Ashes, we'll even look back and think of it as even more significant than we do now. Who knows? But yeah, this wasn't the innings that I put top in my list, but I'm very comfortable with it being number one because of everything that it means, as well as of its quality, I guess.
Well, that is our top 5 innings of 2022. We'll do another video looking at the top 5 spells of 2022. Head to the link in the description if you want to read the write-ups of any of those 5 innings. We'll be back on the YouTube channel later this week with the weekly podcast.